Good morning and welcome to Coffee Time with Kauffman, the comfortable place to talk about women's leadership. Today, I am here with Ashwini Balasubramanian, and we are talking about harnessing your inner strengths as a woman leader. Hey, Ashwini.
Hey Maria, how are you?
I'm very good. So nice to have you on the show today and so excited to talk about this topic.
Thank you for having me, Maria. Appreciate it.
Ashwini is a passionate leader with a proven record of being adept at technical and resource management. Her strengths include cross functional collaboration, standardization of processes, change management, communication skills, and problem solving. Her technical expertise includes product development, testing and validation, NVH, vehicle strategy development, an ADAS overview. Ashwini has inspiring experience leading corporate strategy for billion-dollar organizations. But before I get into harnessing your inner strengths as a woman leader, my name is Maria Kauffman and I'm a life coach. And today I am drinking, actually, I'm on my second cup of flavored coffee. What are you drinking, Ashwini?
I'm not a coffee person, so I'm on my green tea, first cup of green tea. And there's an interesting story about this mug. It's a mug that one of my friends and colleagues gifted while she was leaving the company, and it says, "She believed she could, so she did." Um,
I love that. That's awesome.
so
So
it's
cool.
my daily dose of inspiration with green tea to kind of kickstart my brain, and also the quote to help feel inspired.
Awesome. I love it. Love green tea, as a matter of fact, as well. So, help
Awesome.
us start this conversation about harnessing your inner strength. I'm so glad to have you with us to talk about this very, very important topic. Why are we talking about it today?
So I think as a female engineer, it's not a secret that you can be, and in many instances are a minority, whether it be in college settings or in work settings, or even amongst your social circles. It's very common that if you're a female engineer, especially mechanical, which is what my background is in, it's very common to feel like you're a minority, and it's not just an illusion; it truly is. So when you're doing, trying to excel in those kinds of situations, I think it's absolutely imperative that you're able to reach for the strengths that lie within you, because we don't realize what kind of strength we have until we're, put to test. Eleanor Roosevelt said, women don't, they're like tea bags. They don't flourish until they're like in hot water. So,
I've never
so
heard that. That
yeah,
is awesome.
yeah. So I think we have a lot of inner strength, and a lot of the roadblocks, I think, start from the intrinsic mindset, right? We have a lot of inner voices that constantly are telling us, maybe you're not good enough, maybe this is not the role you should go after. So I think the first step in taking your career journey to the next step is to quieten those inner voices, because you can't always rely on the exterior environment and the external forces to help pull you up. Sometimes you have to pull yourself up first. You have to be an advocate for yourself first. You have to believe in yourself first to create the environment so that others can believe in you and advocate for you.
Very true. So help us understand because a lot of times in my career, and I'm sure as yours as well, and many women engineers, sometimes you're working 12-hour days, 7 days a week in those tough times. What do you practice and what would you recommend to get to that inner peace?
So I think for me, what really works, especially when work's getting tough, like in terms of longer days or longer hours, I think having clear goals, like understanding why you're doing what you're doing, and hopefully the longer hours are not a norm. If they are, maybe you should think about changing what's going on, because that's not a good place to be in, right? So, because
True.
you have, at the crux of it, you have to keep yourself healthy if you want to do anything, whether it be achieving goals professionally or personally. But when those kinds of peaks and troughs happen, when you're in the peak situation with your work load and work life balance, I think it's important to understand why you're in that situation, kind of disassociate yourself from that and say, this is not something I created. It is a situation I'm put in. So, how do I do my best to kind of rise above the situation.
Nice. That's very interesting. And I love the way you put that because that's so true. Along this journey and this path, there are a lot of things that can happen, you know,
Correct,
and the
correct. And I
hard
think
ones should not be sustainable,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think when you disassociate yourself from the situation, you're not blaming yourself as much. You're not looking for somebody to blame. The situation is what it is, right? You kind of become um, indifferent to the situation, so it becomes easier to take objective decisions around what's going on without
Right.
kind of getting emotionally attached to the situation or the outcome that might come out of the situation.
True, because when you're in those tough situations, that's when the stressors kind of kick in and it's harder
Correct.
to be objective.
Correct, correct. I think um, but I also think when you're going through those situations is when you actually grow the most, both professionally and personally, right? And we're talking about harnessing our inner strengths. I have two kids. I have a 15-year-old and a soon-to-be 10-year-old. A lot of people ask me like, how do you juggle all this? You're a mom, you work full time, you have you're a caregiver for your parents, you have a full-time working spouse. How do you manage all that? I think the way I look at it is each of those roles actually give me a lot of different aspects of my leadership that I draw from. So, being a mom, you have to be able to organize things. Otherwise, you'll miss important dates at school, you'll miss important stuff for the kids.
Yeah.
So, that organizational skills that I have built being a mom, I bring it to work as well. So, what I'm trying to say is there are a lot of strengths you build as a woman as you go through your life journey, so it's okay to have that kind of spillover from your personal into your professional life because those kinds of experiences will help you get through those tough situations.
So agreed. As a matter of fact, I didn't realize as well that being a mother was actually going to kind of complement and help. It helped my career, and then my career helped my mothering, and then my mothering helped my
Correct.
career, and my career. It was a fabulous time of growth in leadership.
Correct. And I think it also helps in kind of building the right mindset for your children. I know it might sound like a stretch, but we keep telling our kids, both me and my husband, we tell them, educate yourself, make sure you do a good job with whatever you're doing. And when they look at me, right, it's not empty words. They know we've taken our education and we're putting it to good use. And seeing that sort of gender balanced relationship that we have, I think it's healthy for our son as well because he's growing up in an environment where there are no gender specific roles. Whoever's available that day does the cooking, does the dishwasher. So there's no gender specific roles in the household. And I think that's a very healthy environment. So that's why I said when you start harnessing all of those different aspects of your life, it's not just for you, but for the next generation, you can kind of set examples as well.
That's awesome. Help us understand what were your early influences and what was it like for you growing up? Did you have a similar environment where you were kind of taught some of those things, or was that something from a life experience that you wanted to maybe change and instill in your children as you brought them up?
Yeah, yeah. So I think for me, I grew up in India. So I was born and raised in India. I'm an only child. I have no siblings.
Oh,
Growing up, especially my mom, she was, I almost sometimes think she vicariously lived her life through me. She didn't have the opportunity to go pursue the career she wanted to pursue because of all the generational societal norms that she had to conform to. So she put that drive inside of me to say, you got to excel, you got to do well at whatever you're doing. You can't settle for less. She kind of put that drive, and I strongly believe she lived her life vicariously through me. So that was probably the first impetus, right? To kind of say, this is how you want to kind of plan your growth, and that drive that you have comes from that childhood experience. And then my dad was probably the first ally I had with the opposite gender, right? So it's not normal for girls to choose mechanical engineering in India. It wasn't normal for parents to spend on education, expensive education for their daughters. But my dad was completely the opposite. And maybe because I was a single child, there was a different mentality. But he said, if she has the aptitude, she's going to go do what she wants to do, despite, maybe external voices telling him not to do so. Um, so I think those were my early influencers. But as a child, I always had this gravitation towards science and math. They were my favorite subjects, right? I had this curiosity to ask questions, and I always thought it was fascinating. You can find answers within the world of math and science when you're asking all these questions. And sometimes, even if you don't know the answer, you can kind of go on an exploratory journey. So I would think all of that kind of cemented my interest in getting into engineering, right, when I graduated high school.
How early did it start? Was it, math you're obviously doing in like elementary school, science a little bit later? When did
I
you
would
kind of
say I probably as early as second or third grade.
Yeah,
Very early on, I knew. I knew I wasn't interested. I was always interested in history, but I wasn't interested enough to go into like English literature or law or anything like that. I always knew I would do something within the STEM field. That I always knew because I was just so fascinated by it.
awesome. So then what was that like for you, high school getting into college?
So, in high school, I was in a very gender balanced environment. So, I don't think I got the dose of how it is to be a minority until I got to college. So in college, I was one of only two women, all 4 years of mechanical engineering, right? So there was where I started to kind of get the experience of what it is to be a minority. But there are advantages to being a minority, and we don't talk about those enough, right? When you're the one of two women in a group of say 120 to 40 people can't forget you. You get noticed much easier, right? So that's why I say there's always a silver lining to any situation. And you kind of have to capitalize on that because if you are competent, you have to be competent. That's, a no brainer. But if you're competent, when you are in a minority situation, when you are a minority, you actually have an advantage over the people that are the majority. And we don't think of it that way, right?
True.
So I think it's easier to get noticed. It's difficult for people to forget you. And that actually helps in getting opportunities that you might not have thought of yourself.
Yeah, like I wanted to say whatever, like it opens up opportunities, period.
Correct. Correct.
So then help us, because around that time, I remember an uncle of mine would say something like, you can't expect anyone else to love you if you don't love yourself. So there was a logical part of that where I understood it logically, but then to harness that inner strength and to live it was something that I actually would kind of struggle with and had to figure out I'll say the hard way. So can you help us also with that? There's definitely a logical side to understanding what we're talking about, but there's also another side to actually harness that inner strength.
Yeah, yeah. So I think, when you are in a tough situation, it's actually hard to think that you can find the strength to keep going, right? Whether you are in a project that seems out of control or whether you are in a situation where you're going through your first motherhood journey and you're doing all sorts of firsts because you haven't done it before. But I think when you're put in those situations, I truly believe you get put in the situations only because you can handle them. The opportunities that have come my way, I would have never thought that I could actually handle it myself. But somebody else already seems to see the potential in you. So you got to kind of trust in that viewpoint and kind of start to use that to build your own confidence, right? But I also think there's a very thin, fine balance between the confidence and humility. So if you have to be confident enough so that you can accomplish what you need to accomplish, but you can't let it get to your head either. So I think if you can balance the humility and the confidence, um, that will help you stay even keel and balanced in any situation. Then that means you have kind of opened yourself up to access all the inner strength you have. Because if you let either of those emotions overpower you, you will lock yourself out of the inner strength that you can harness, right?
Ooh, that was well stated and absolutely true. And this is where I do love to kind of talk about, of course, I advocate for women's leadership, But I do think that there's a quality because of some of the obstacles that come about for women to take that leadership role and to truly lead by example in that place of balance where it's confident, but with humility.
Correct. And I think the first thing to remember is, you don't allow anyone else to determine what success looks like for you, right? So you have to start from that point. If success is being the CEO of a company, absolutely go for it. Have the drive, have the aspiration. If success looks like being a homemaker and raising your kids, that's totally fine too. Or if success looks like being a career woman and not wanting a family, that's okay too, as long as it is your decision and no one's forcing you into those to conform to societal norms. So I think because of that particular thought process, I think is important to have so that you can build the confidence in your decision making process. I think it's okay to have allies. It's okay to have mentors where you can kind of go for check-ins and kind of recalibrate yourself when you're making important decisions. But ultimately, that inner decision making process has to come from you. It has to start from you. No one's going to sit and tell you, like, oh, maybe you have this potential, maybe you should aspire to be this. So, unfortunately, everybody's busy with their lives. People have a lot of stuff going on. Life happens for everybody just like it does for you. So, you can't wait around for approval or for guidance all the time. Sometimes you have to seek them out. And it's okay to do that. And people are more than happy to help if you ask enough, right?
Yes. And I think that absolutely is important. And it's almost an essential part of that recipe to tap into the deepest parts of your inner strength.
Correct. So, like, for example, I think, I worked in the automotive industry for 19 years before I came to Harley this January. So, within the automotive industry, I was able to see a lot of leaders that, there's this misconception that if you have to be a leader, you have to be aggressive. You have to be, and it kind of starts to borderline on nasty and aggressive, right? I think your work has to be aggressive. You don't have to be aggressive, but,
I
but
love it.
yeah. But I think as a woman, it's hard because you are looking at all the other leaders around you, and sometimes you think like maybe I should change myself because that's the leadership model I'm looking at, right? But that's when it's important to kind of check what you're thinking and look at yourself internally and say, that's not me. I want to be the authentic me because that's the best version of myself. That's the strongest version of myself. For example, for me, I know I can be assertive without coming across as nasty. I think that's a core strength of mine. And I didn't realize that until 10 years into my career. I wish somebody had told me to do an inner strength survey or something like that. But once you understand what that core inner strength is, you absolutely have to kind of tap into it and bring it to the forefront. Because once you know that's your core strength and you bring it to the forefront, it becomes visible to everybody around you and it makes you very unique. And I think even though you might not behave and look like the other leaders that are in your industry, it is okay because now you stand out,
That was very well stated. And I think maybe once again in my career, some of these things like doing strength finders and doing those kind of assessments and finding out those things, they really weren't available 30 years ago. It is a great time right now to be able to delve into leadership in a new way that accelerates women's abilities and opportunities to seek these advancements.
Yeah, and if I could, put a quarter every time somebody said, "Oh my God, women are emotional. I have to be careful how I present this information to them," I'd probably be a millionaire by now. But but, but the response I have to that is yes, women are emotional, not because by choice, just because of the way our hormones work. Everything we do is so tied to our emotions. I think if women recognize that, and even the men that work with us recognize that, you need to tap into that because that makes you a very empathetic leader, that you're able to use your emotions to your advantage and actually become a leader that people can trust, people can choose to follow, and not just because you're in the position of authority and people have to follow you. So I think even though it's been portrayed as a weakness, so far, I think we need to change the way we look at it. I think it's a strength because we can tap into those emotions. We we make ourselves look like real people. We're not sitting in our ivory tower and we're not an image, but we make ourselves look like real people, and people want to trust real people, not people, folks sitting in ivory towers, I guess.
Right. Now, you mentioned at the 10-year mark, that tends to be a pretty interesting thing that I teach about in a couple different ways, right? I know what it was like for me at that 10-year mark, and then 10 and 20, those chunks of 10. And I also see it a lot in my clients where there's either a bit of frustration or boredom that happens somewhere after the 10-year mark. What can you share from your career that were pivotal points that kind of helped you get to certain places of obviously leadership?
So I think, initially, as I was growing up, and I've said this many times too outside, is my dad moved around quite a bit. So every 2 years I would change schools. So for me, if I'm not challenged enough, I get bored very easily. And I know that about myself. So if I'm in a role, I've obviously stayed in companies for more than 2 years. I've stayed the longest term I've had is about 8 years. But even within those 8 years, I've constantly sought out new ways to add challenges to my current role, or I've sought out roles that sometimes might not be even a step up, but a lateral move because it challenges me to add a completely new skill set, right? So, like I said, you have to be an advocate for yourself. As a minority, I have found it's a lot harder to find advocates and sponsors. It's not easy. So when you don't have strong sponsors for your career, it's hard to make exponential growth steps in your career if you don't strongly advocate for yourself. And you will get pushback because I've had people say, "Why are you aspiring to be in that role?" Because they can't see you there yet. But if you can see yourself there, because every role you go to, you're taking some amount of transferable skill set, right? So if you're not afraid to take that plunge, you should absolutely still keep trying because at one point you will crack that door open, right? So those sorts of pivots have been very essential, I would say, or maybe pivotal in my career to kind of make those exponential growth steps, right?
Okay, so help me understand. Is it you have a sense of boredom and then you act on it?
I know when the boredom was starting to kick in, right? Like if things are running, smoothly, I'm doing the same thing from day to day. I know I need to change it up because if boredom kicks in, I feel like I won't tap into my inner potential to maximize it and be the best I can be. So with that, when I start getting that feeling that I'm becoming complacent, I will reach out to my superior and say, I think I can take on more. I have more bandwidth. Is there anything I can do to help out? Or if I see in staff meetings where they're struggling with a certain area and certain problem, and I think I can use some of my strengths to help them overcome those pain points, I will just go and propose that I support that, right? They might not have thought of it that way. And like I said, sometimes they said, yes, let's come on over. And sometimes like, no, 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 no.
Oh,
So that happens too, right? So you have to be ready to hear yes and no. But I think you have to recognize that as to how you operate. Not everybody gets bored easily. There are people that are very happy doing the same thing and they're experts in their field. And that's okay too, right? But if you want to make significant growth steps without a strong sponsor for your career, I think you have to seek those challenges out yourself.
awesome and well stated. So this is kind of like a little bit of the way you have operated, but there's also been times in your career, correct me if I'm wrong, that people actually seek you out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, um, so I'll tell you an interesting story. One of the pivots I did when I worked for an automotive tier one supplier um, happened because I went and took a German language class. I know it sounds very strange, I'm a mechanical engineer, right? I have no electronics background. But I went on to take a role supervising autonomous driving technology for the supplier. And that happened because the manager that hired me, he and I went to the German language class together. Now, you think about it and say, German language class, electronics, you can't make the connection, right? But I think what he ended up doing was hired me for my attitude, hired me for potential, and hired me for the leadership skills he saw at that time. So sometimes I think, um, you know, the way things work out, like, they seek you out not because of your current role necessarily. Yes, you have to do a good job there. And I think most of us come to work saying we want to make an impact, right? So I think most of us work that way. But I think you have these additional opportunities that come your way that display your potential in different ways, in different lenses. So people that are looking at you in all different platforms can seek you out because they've seen potential, right? So it might not always based on accomplishment, might be based on potential also, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and I hear you using the word see your potential, but actually that speaks to the topic that we're talking about and what you said earlier, in that you have to kind of find that inner strength and really believe and understand that some of those inner strengths are actually going to be the leadership that pours out of you in, in not necessarily in a verbal language. You don't have to
Right.
talk about your inner strengths, but it sounds like what was happening was your inner strength was emanating in a way that they saw the potential.
Correct. And I think when I made that pivot, I remember the first week I was telling myself, like, what the hell have I gotten myself into, right? I was so comfortable with my previous job. Um, but on the other hand, I said, okay, I can't be so overwhelmed. So you have to break it down into chunks that you can manageably handle, right? Like they say, when you're doing a bungee jump, they say it's never as scary as it actually looks. So it's like you have to break the 30,000 feet view into maybe 5,000 feet steps. So you can take one step at a time and then it looks more manageable. So you have to think about what transferable skill sets are you bringing. And I found that when you're taking on roles like that, when you actually admit what you don't know, you actually gather a lot of respect and people are actually willing to help you. Because you're not coming into it, with the need to make an impression. You're coming into it with the need to learn and contribute, right? So when you have that kind of attitude, I find people rally around you to actually help you succeed. And I've done that a couple of times. I also made another switch from engineering to sales and marketing um, as well. Just before I came to Harley, that was the switch I made. And I remember being very skeptical about whether one, I would like it because I've always been in product engineering up until that point, and also about whether I would actually do well. But what I can tell you is, in the 20-year career I've had, the sales and marketing role, I actually had so much fun with it. I learned a ton, no doubt about it. But I also felt like I probably learned the most about the overall business because staying within engineering, I probably would have never understood some of the commercial aspects of the business that I never had exposure to. So what I'm trying to get at is sometimes you have to seek them out, or if people are seeking you out, um, think that you've done things before. Like nobody, people that learn to ride a bike, you're not born with those skills. You learn how to ride a bike. For me, when I came from India to the US, I had never driven a car. I went directly from using public transportation to driving a car. So you have to remind yourself of the skills you've taught yourself, things you've never done before. And even, being a mom, nobody teaches you how to be a mom. Nobody can prepare you for being a mom. Even the second time around, the child is so different. You can use some skills from the first time, but you have to teach yourself some of those skill sets. So you have to kind of harness that every time you take on something that's very different and out of your wheelhouse. And if you start doing that, it becomes a habit, right? Like you can tap into those kind of hidden qualities you don't tap into on a daily basis, but you can tap into those so that you can kind of accelerate your learning in that new role.
So true. And I've had obviously transitions in jobs. Pretty much, I stayed pretty much in engineering, but in those moments where it did seem like, because I would say that a lot of professional women tend to be driven. So in that drive, you can kind of get to a little bit of an overdrive where it's like,
Yeah.
whoa, what did I get myself into? And it can, as you expand as a person and as that inner strength actually grows, it's a new sensation too.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of advantages to growing that kind of inner strength. And I think if you share that inner strength to pull other people along with you, you'll find that one, it fills your bucket in ways you never thought it could. Your day job can never fill your bucket that way. Your emotional bucket, I mean. So when I was at ZF, which is a tier one supplier, I came back from my second maternity leave, and I remember feeling so overwhelmed because he was a preemie and I had to put him back in daycare and so on and so forth. Um, I remember feeling so emotionally and physically overwhelmed and tired. And I said, I can't be the only one going through this. So I started asking around, and of course, every lot of other women are going through the same thing. Maybe different kinds of challenges, but everybody's going through some sort of challenge. So we started to kind of, create this resource group where we would come together. We were only 15 women in that building at that time that would come together and talk about what challenges we're facing. How can we help each other? We would share information about daycare centers that offer subsidies and things. It started out from a very selfish need, if you will, of wanting to create your own tribe. But eventually it grew so much that by the time I left the company, we had about 550 people in that group. We had gotten an executive sponsor. We were doing mentoring programs. We were doing training programs and things like that. The reason I say that is when you have that drive, when you have that, your inner strength continues to grow, make it a point to share it with others, use it to empower others too. Because one, like I said, it fills your emotional bucket. Two, I think it unknowingly, unconsciously, you're creating an ally network that you can tap into like no other, right? Like, remember, I said it's hard to find sponsor and advocates, but when you put yourself in those kinds of situations, subconsciously, you're creating a lot of advocates and allies for yourself.
And it becomes, I think, more of a community that's doing the same thing that you talk about from a personal standpoint when you harness your inner strengths. When you bring a bunch of people and you're actually harnessing the inner strengths, right,
Correct.
of a group, it is massively contagious.
Yeah, yeah. And for me, I think, one of my biggest role models is RBG, right? Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I love her.
Yep.
I
I'm
still
a
think
fan too. Love her.
I think she's an absolute rock star. She's probably doing her push-ups, in the heavenly abode still. But I totally relate to her personality because I remember her saying, "You have to fight and raise your voice for what's important, but you have to do it in a way where other people want to join you in the fight."
Yes.
So I think when you're doing this sort of work around diversity, equity, and inclusion, what's important is two aspects. One is to not victimize yourself and glorify being a victim. And two, I think, is to not demonize the majority. Because I truly believe that the majority folks are not viciously behaving the way they are. It's just out of lack of awareness and lack of exposure to a diverse environment, right? So when you have a seat at the table, work on educating others of the different viewpoints they're missing without demonizing them. I think that's how you create allies because women by ourselves, um, we can do a lot of stuff by empowering ourselves. But I think if the allies join our cause, our mission, I think we'll accelerate the progress women need to make in corporate America.
Yes, so agreed. And I think it gets a little bit, I'll say tricky, because sometimes I like to talk about either we're creating peace or we're creating war.
Yeah,
And it's not
yeah.
necessarily when you talk about demonizing, right? There's a part of the creating war that is just, I mean, it's creating war, right?
Yeah, because if you want to truly resolve the issue, you want to bring people along. You want
Yes,
people to see your viewpoint, and you're not going to do that by demonizing them.
correct.
I don't think anybody wants to be in a situation where they feel like they're put on the spot. That's why even when we have conversations at home, sometimes our kids will say, "Well, women are always like this, men are always like this," and I'm like, "Don't stereotype. Don't
Yeah.
ever stereotype because each person is different." When you start stereotyping, you move far away from the solution, and you're just creating that sort of conflict, right? That some bodies thrive in. So if you want to get to resolution, a solution, and move forward, you have to bring people over to your side, not
Oh,
demonize.
that's a beautiful example, right? So it's just because there is a tendency to stereotype. I'm probably, one. I mean, I'm an offender of that. I was brought up in a very in a confrontational and an environment that basically was very judgmental and critical. So some of
Right,
that was
right,
so imprinted that it's kind of hard for me to get out of. So I have to force myself to choose language and to navigate my language in a way that says, well, okay, maybe there's a stereotype out there that people kind of maybe are aware of, but another perspective or a different way to look at this, I would rather think of it this way. So it sounds like you did that
correct,
with in the home where you're saying, oh, that's one way to kind of look at it and talk about it. But here's a peaceful approach, right? Or here's
correct,
another way.
correct, correct. And I think, especially women, I think are inherently we've been good at trying to handle a lot of things at the same time, right? We know how to balance uncomfortable conversations at home. We've seen our moms do this.
Right.
We've seen our grandmas do this, and we've seen them multitask constantly. So if you think of all the organizations that have been extremely successful, like Southwest or Apple, these companies have many different facets that they do extremely well. It's not just one thing, right? They do many different things really well, which means it's extremely hard to copy them. And that I think that's why, even though Southwest is in an airline industry where it's cutthroat, profits are hard to make, they've been very successful. Of course, they have a business strategy, strong business strategy behind it, but that strategy focuses on multiple areas. And the reason I mention that is I think if women think of ourselves like an organization, and if we build strengths and we pull our strengths from those different departments that we play roles in, we become a very unique asset that is unlike anything else that's out there. And you become a very competitive asset that people want to seek out and work with, because you bring a completely different perspective, completely different um, competitiveness, competitive edge, that's hard to emulate, that's hard to beat, when you think of yourself like that.
Right. And that was well described because, like you said, it's when you see a company out there that's really successful, there's you want to reverse engineer it, right? Who
Correct.
doesn't want to be
Correct.
successful? We do that with women too. Like, oh, and I've done that.
Correct.
I feel
Correct.
like I've done that most of my life. Is like, why are these people, and I know I have capabilities, but there's a disconnect. So I
Correct.
love the way you said that
Correct.
because it is multifaceted. And that I think
Correct.
is a beautiful thing that that individuals, that everyone brings to the table. Um,
Because I
especially
think that especially if you want to go on a leadership journey, a people leadership journey, I think you have to have multiple facets to your personality, right? I'm not saying you have to be multi-faced, but you have to
right.
have multiple aspects and facets to your personality where you can, be the rock solid engineer that can look at data, can help problem solve, roll up the sleeves and get into the details when it's required. You can be the mentor and coach and step back and let your team problem solve where required, right? And then you also have enough empathy to be the leader that can understand what's going on behind the scenes, because all of, if you peel back and talk to your team, there's always some sort of personal challenge going on. So you can kind of tap into those different aspects, right? So you can kind of juggle and move around based on the situation. You adapt your style, you adapt what you do, and you tap into those multifacets of your personality, and you become a much more effective leader, especially if you want to be on the people leadership journey. I think it's absolutely important to kind of tap into those multifacets of your personality.
Yeah. So it's interesting to see what's going on. It's wonderful to hear your story and all about your success. Help us understand a little bit about the future. If more people can tap into harnessing their inner strengths, especially in women's leadership, what is the potential for the future? Where do you see us going?
I think when you tap into your inner strength, I think, we keep talking about the glass ceiling, right? That women have. I think when you tap into your inner strength and you keep honing those skills, you keep building on them and you tap into those inner strengths, I think the glass ceiling won't exist at one point because your strength is so much more powerful that it becomes non-existent, right? So that means basically you can stand tall. I know we're not talking in person. I'm only 5 feet. I'm very petite, right? But your strength and your physical height probably have no correlation. What I'm trying to say is, the inner strength that you have can make you tall figuratively enough that there is no glass ceiling anymore because you are not limiting yourself based on where you think the glass ceiling is. You are creating your own goals, your own aspirational, life goals that you want to achieve based on what you think you need to do, based on your own inner confidence, based on your inner strength, which means you're not limiting yourself to the glass ceiling that others think exists at this level, right?
That is awesome. I love it. So the future there's no glass ceiling.
There is no glass ceiling. There's no limit to what you can do. The limit is only in your own mind. I'm not trying to, romanticize the idea of just looking at yourself, right? I recognize that there is limitations that are put in front of you all the time because you're a minority, because you don't have advocates or sponsors. There might be a lot of challenges and obstacles that come in front of you. But I think if you are able to harness that inner strength, I think you can overcome those with grace and style, in such a way that other people want to follow in your path. You can pave the way for more if you truly tap into that inner strength.
Yes. Man, we cannot hear that enough because there's always going to be challenges. There's always going to be obstacles. When we live in a world that doesn't have any glass ceilings, we start to really understand and believe in the impossible and the
Correct.
unstoppable. There are no
Correct.
limits.
That brings me to my favorite quote by Nelson Mandela, right? So he said, "It always seems impossible until it's done." Right? It always seems impossible until it's done, especially if you are a female, if you are a minority. It's hard to see more people like yourself, at the low spots where you want to go. So it feels impossible and it can be overwhelming. So every time I feel overwhelmed, that's the quote I go to, right? And if you think about it, every breakthrough we've had, whether in technology, even going to the moon, right? Going to the moon, taking that space journey, every breakthrough always seems like a crazy idea until the day before it actually happens. So, till we actually landed on the moon, it probably sounded like a crazy idea. But once we did that, we tend to celebrate it as a triumph of technology. And, the author of the book, Think Like a Rocket Scientist, re-emphasizes this. He says it was not a triumph of technology. It was a triumph of people believing that the impossible was possible. So I think if you continue to kind of believe in yourself, tap into your confidence, tap into your humility, your assertiveness, I think, like I said, the glass ceiling actually disappears and you decide how far you want to go and how far you can go.
Awesome. I love it. We do have a comment from Kanchana that says, as you both say, women empowerment always strengthens females' leadership, with a thumbs up.
Yeah, it does, right? So I think we have a lot of talk around stereotypes where women are catty, we don't help each other. I have not found that to be true. I think if you um, find that you're getting stuck in that stereotype, you make the first move. You first lend out a helping hand, and you'll find a lot more people are ready to do the same. It's just that to make the first move, and then you'll see a lot more people lean in and they actually lend a helping hand, more than maybe you can handle it at times. So I think those sorts of behavior, don't wait for someone to do it. It's okay if you're the first person, reaching out. If you're the first person to, break that wall down, it's okay to do that because you'll find there's a lot of opportunity and untapped potential behind those walls.
Yeah, highly encouraged, as a matter of fact.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ashwini, thank you so much for being on the show today. Thanks for the inspiring quote. And I'm telling you, the entire interview has been a complete inspiration. I've been, getting these chills up and down with all of your insights and inspirations. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria. I really appreciate it. I know by the end of this session, it looks like I'm going to have an aura of enlightenment around me. You've got the sun.
The sun has been chasing you. You're just so bright.
But I think it's been an absolute pleasure. Again, thank you so much for reaching out. I think when we have these conversations, it helps also reiterate for myself kind of how far we've come, even in my own personal journey, but also recognizing how many more miles we have to go before women can truly feel like they're free. So in my mind, I think I am not free until, every woman around me, at least the people that I know that work with, feel like they don't have shackles, even though those shackles might be very different than mine. So I'm totally committed to helping other women around me. So, many of your listeners, I'm a pretty open networker. They want to reach out, just have a chat, just want to vent. It's okay. I provide psychological safe spaces. So
I love it. I will make sure that I include your contact information in the show notes so they can get in touch with you. It has been a total pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Maria. Thanks, everybody.
Coffee Time with Kauffman is the comfortable place to discuss women's leadership because I am on a mission to help the world discover the truth about what women are capable of. When you are ready for your leadership mastery makeover, go to mariakaufman.com and click on Consult a Coach, where you can schedule time with me for an empowerment session. Have a great week. Enjoy your adventures and journey responsibly. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Thanks, everybody.